The year was 2021. The world was slowly starting to move again after the pandemic, but the streets still felt empty and strange. I was driving for Uber to earn extra money. My name is Karen Miller, and I usually worked late shifts. That night, the city felt like a ghost town. I was tired and hoping for one last trip so I could go home and sleep. The app made a loud noise, signaling a new request. The name on the screen was Monica. The pickup was at a local bowling alley about 5 minutes away. I followed the map to a large, dim parking lot. Most of the lights were out, but one street light was still working. Standing right under that light was a person who immediately caught my eye. She was incredibly beautiful. She had short, stylish auburn hair that glowed under the yellow light. She was wearing a short black dress with laces up the front and tall gladiator sandals that went up to her knee. She looked like she was dressed for a high-end party, not a quiet night in a parking lot. I rolled down my window and asked if she was Monica. She didn't say anything, but she nodded with a soft smile and sat in the back seat. The destination was far from the city center. As I drove, the bright lights of town faded away. We entered an area that felt completely abandoned. There were no streetlights here, just tall trees and empty lots. Eventually, the GPS told me to stop in front of a specific house. It was a terrifying place. The house was rotting, the paint was peeling off the walls, and the windows were boarded up with wood. The yard was a mess of tall weeds and trash. It looked like nobody had lived there for years. The passenger leaned forward. Her voice was smooth and very calm. She told me to let the meter keep running because she had to go inside for a moment. I watched her walk through the tall grass. She moved very gracefully. She opened the front door of that dark, scary house and went inside. I sat in my car with the doors locked. The silence was heavy. I kept checking my mirrors, feeling like someone was watching me. After a few minutes, I saw movement in a window on the second floor. The woman was standing there, looking down at me. She waved her hand, signaling for me to come inside the house. She told me to come in so she could give me the money for the ride. I felt a sharp knot of fear in my stomach. The house was pitch black and looked dangerous. I didn't want to leave the safety of my car. I shook my head and told her no. I told her I would stay right there and wait for her to come back out. She didn't argue. She disappeared from the window and came back out the front door a minute later. She got into the back seat and asked me to take her to the club district downtown. I drove back toward the city. I thought she might be meeting friends, but when we got to the club area, everything was dead. Because of the pandemic restrictions, the bars were closed and the neon signs were dark. There was no music and no people on the sidewalks. It was a very lonely sight. I pulled over to the side of the road and told her the ride was over. I checked the screen and told her the total was $17. She reached forward to hand me the cash. As she spoke to thank me, I finally realized the truth. The light from the dashboard hit her face, and I heard the deep, resonant tone of her voice. In that moment, I knew she was a ladyboy. She was so beautiful and elegant that I hadn't even suspected it during the entire trip. She opened the door and stepped out. She didn't look back. I watched her walk down a dark side street until she vanished into the shadows. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my heart. I reached for my phone to end the trip on the app, but something was wrong. The app had not updated. It still showed that I was supposed to pick up Monica at the bowling alley. I thought the app had frozen, so I tapped the call button to see what was happening. A woman answered immediately. She sounded very different from my passenger. Her voice was harsh, loud, and very angry. She told me her name was Monica. She said she had been standing outside the bowling alley with her briefcase for over 20 minutes. She asked me why I hadn't shown up yet. I looked at the empty back seat. Then I looked at the $17 in my hand. My skin crawled. I realized I had picked up the wrong person. I had driven a total stranger to a dark, abandoned house and sat there while they watched me from an upstairs window. I didn't know who the person in the black dress was or why they wanted me to come inside that house. I realized how lucky I was that I stayed in the car. I realized then that because I was so tired, I had made a massive mistake. I hadn't asked for any verification and had completely skipped the OTP part in my hurry to start the trip. I drove home as fast as I could, constantly looking in my rearview mirror, wondering who had really been sitting behind me. I am now 16 years old, but the events that changed my life forever took place just last year when I was 15. Back then, my younger brother Bob was only 13 years old. We lived alone with our dad in a house near the countryside. Our mother had never taken any responsibility for us, so it was just the three of us trying to make a life together. It was a quiet, simple existence where we mostly kept to ourselves. But everything shattered on a bright, clear afternoon while we were coming back from our tuition class. The walk home from tuition was usually a very routine part of our day. My dad worked long hours at his job, often leaving the house well before we even woke up. Bob and I were very used to managing the 2-mile trek by ourselves. We always took the exact same single route to get back to our house every day. On this afternoon, the sun was shining brightly and it was a beautiful, clear day. The heat felt heavy and still as we walked along the path that cut through a wide farm area. The road was lined with long, towering trees that cast thin shadows across the dirt. Bob was walking just a few paces ahead of me, clutching his school books tightly in his arms. Everything happened in a sudden blur of motion that I still struggled to process. As we moved through the quiet farm area, a red van pulled into view from the distance. Its engine was idling with a low, menacing hum that seemed out of place. As the van slowed down to a crawl right beside us, Bob stumbled slightly. The books he was carrying slipped from his grip and scattered all over the dry ground. I stopped immediately to help him pick them up, but as I looked up, I saw the side door of the van slide open. A large, muscular man leaped out. Before I could even open my mouth to shout a warning or ask what was happening, the man grabbed Bob by the waist and dragged him violently into the vehicle. Panic seized my entire body. I stood frozen for a split second in utter confusion, unable to understand what was happening in front of my eyes. The man then turned his attention toward me. He stepped back out of the van, his frame appearing massive and imposing in the bright daylight. I finally found my voice and began to scream for help as loud as I could. My legs finally kicked into gear and I bolted away as fast as I could. I realized then why he had chosen this spot for the attack. It was a very quiet area where no other people were living close enough to hear my cries. As I ran, I risked a quick glance back over my shoulder to see how close he was. The man was gaining on me quickly. In that moment of high adrenaline clarity, I actually managed to get a good look at his face. My heart stopped. Despite the short-cropped hair he was wearing now, I recognized him. It was my uncle. My mind began to race with 1,000 questions. I wondered why on earth he was there and why he was doing this to us. I knew for a fact that my uncle had been in jail, so I could only assume at the time that he had been let out on parole. I tried to scream out his name, asking him through my gasps for air why he was doing this. He remained chillingly silent. He was far too fast and much too strong for a 15-year-old boy to outrun for very long. Within seconds, he had caught up to me. His heavy hands pinned my arms tightly to my sides, cutting off any chance of escape. He dragged me back toward the red van. He threw me inside the dark interior right next to my terrified brother. He slammed the heavy doors shut, and the van sped away from the farm area. Later that evening, my dad returned home from work only to find the house completely empty. When he realized we were nowhere to be found, he became frantic. He eventually began to piece together the truth of what might have happened. He went directly to my mother's house, suspecting that she was involved in our disappearance. When he arrived there, he found exactly what he feared. We were there with her. It turned out the entire kidnapping incident had been orchestrated by my mother. It was all her idea to have our uncle snatch us off the street. The police arrived at my mother's house shortly after my dad did. However, before the authorities could take us back home, my mother insisted on a strange request. She wanted to speak to Bob and me separately in private. I still do not know exactly what she said to my brother behind those closed doors, but I could tell that something in Bob changed fundamentally that day. When the time finally came for us to leave and go home, Bob did something I never expected. He flatly refused to go back home with my dad. Even when my dad reached out to take us, Bob stayed by our mother's side. The police took my uncle back to jail immediately. They charged him with kidnapping, and his situation was made worse because of his extensive past criminal records. My mother stayed in her home. My dad and I were forced to leave without my brother. Since that day, My brother has never come back home to live with us. I am 16 years old now, and I still live with my dad in the same area. Every day I think about that walk home. The sun still shines on the farm area and the long trees still line the road. But our family was never the same after that afternoon. I often look at the empty space where Bob used to be and realize how quickly a single sunny day can turn into a nightmare that never truly ends. I am currently in my final year of college, a time when most people are starting to find their own path. My situation is a bit more complicated, however, because of my parents. They are incredibly, almost suffocatingly protective. Growing up, I realized it wasn't just typical parental worry. It was because of how people reacted to my appearance. Everywhere I go, whether it is on campus or just walking down the street, I feel eyes on me. It doesn't matter if it is a girl my age, a man passing by, or even an older uncle at a shop. They all look at me like I am some kind of prize or a treat they've been waiting for. This constant, lingering attention has made my parents terrified for my safety. But I have grown to dislike the cage they've built around me. And to prove I could exist in the world without them, I took a part-time job. I started at a Target store, working the shift from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. The night of the incident was a Friday, and a heavy, relentless rain was lashing against the massive glass front of the store. The rhythmic drumming of the storm echoed through the high ceilings, making the store feel lonely and exposed. At 9 p.m., my female coworker finished her shift. She gave me a sympathetic look as she pulled on her raincoat. She left me alone at the front. At that point, a man around 25 years old came to the registers. He was the closing manager sent to help me manage the final hour, so we could lock up at 10 p.m. While he was heading toward the back, his phone began to vibrate. He answered it quickly, and I watched as his expression shifted from professional to pure panic. He stayed on the call for a minute, pacing and gesturing urgently as he spoke to someone about a crisis at his house. Once he hung up, he rushed over to me and placed the heavy store keys directly onto the table. He pointed emphatically at the cleaning checklist on the counter and told me that he had something important to do at his home. So today I had to finish the work and secure the entire building myself. With a final, apologetic nod, he grabbed his cap and bolted out the side door. The heavy click of the lock signaled his departure, leaving me entirely alone in the echoing silence of the massive store. Suddenly, the motion sensors chimed and a customer walked in. I looked up, expecting to offer a greeting, but felt immediate confusion. The man was soaked from the rain and had no cart or basket. He wore a thick, dark hoodie with the hood pulled low over his face, and his hands were shoved deep into his pockets. I said hello. He didn't look at me or say a word. He just started walking slowly through the aisles. He wasn't looking at the products. He was just scanning the building. He eventually circled back and walked back out into the downpour. I stood there for a moment, watching him through the glass. He didn't walk toward a car. He just crossed the wet pavement and vanished into the darkness. I felt a knot of unease in my stomach. Being alone at the front definitely didn't help my nerves. I knew that because of how people usually looked at me. I had to be extra careful, but I didn't want to call my parents and prove them right. I didn't want to prove the world was a dangerous place for me. I wanted to finish my shift and show I was reliable. I spent the next 20 minutes cleaning the counters and organizing the displays. At some point, I happened to look up. My heart nearly stopped. Standing right outside the main glass entrance was that same man. He was dressed entirely in black, and because it was so dark outside, he looked like a shadow. He was pressed against the glass. By the time I fully recognized him, he had already started walking away. I wondered how long he had been standing there, just watching me work through the window. I walked up to the glass doors to see where he went, but the guy was gone. The eerie way he kept appearing made my skin crawl. I thought about calling my dad, but I didn't want to worry him. I didn't want him to worry over a suspicious stranger. I was still new to this job and wanted to prove I could handle myself. I stayed on high alert for the next hour, staring at the rain-slicked lot. But as time passed and no one else came in, my focus started to slip. I was on my phone for a while until I heard a couple of sharp metallic creaks coming from the very back of the building. They were near the loading docks. I stood up and walked toward the back. straining to hear over the rain. I could hear a distinct shuffling sound, like heavy objects being dragged. I realized someone was back there who shouldn't be, and I knew I needed to leave. I turned and moved as quietly as possible toward the front sliding doors to get out and call for help. But when I pushed against the door, it wouldn't move. I looked down through the glass and felt a surge of pure terror. A heavy-duty chain had been looped through the exterior handles and padlocked shut. I realized this was what the man had been doing when I saw him standing outside earlier. He had been trapping me. With the front doors chained, there was only one other way out, the back exit. I began to step toward the back of the store, my heart drumming so loudly I was afraid he would hear it. The shuffling sounds were still happening, but they were careful. When I reached the edge of the storage room and peered inside, I saw him. His back was to me, and he was crouched near the emergency exit. He was frantically trying to wind a thick nylon rope. He was trying to tie the crash bar of the door shut from the inside. This was my only chance. I didn't think. I just ran. I sprinted toward the door with every bit of strength I had. The man heard my footsteps and spun around. He lunged for me, but I reached the door first. I threw my weight against the handle. Because he hadn't finished securing the rope, the knot slipped. The door flew open and I stumbled out into the freezing rain. The man followed me out, but once he realized we were outside and the alarm was blaring, he turned and sprinted toward the woods. I made it to my car, locked the doors, and called my dad and the police. When they arrived, they found the chain on the front doors and the rope by the back exit. It was clear he had intended to trap me inside the dark store with him. His intentions were likely horrifying. And replaying the night back, I realized how close I came to a situation with no escape. My parents were terrified, and while their protectiveness has only increased, I can't blame them as much anymore. I learned that night that being independent doesn't mean ignoring your instincts, especially when you know the attention you attract. In a small town with around 2,400 people, a young woman lived a calm and simple life with her parents. Their daily routine was steady and peaceful. Her mother worked as an accountant at the local public hospital. Her father took care of a farm that was right next to their house. Since the farm was so close, he was almost always nearby, working in the fields just a few steps away from home. The young woman studied at a nearby college. The distance from college to her house was not very long, but she still had to walk along a 2-lane road every day to get back home. She didn't mind the walk much. In fact, she often looked forward to it because she knew her mother would be cooking dinner. The smell of fresh, homemade food was always waiting for her. To save time, she often took a shortcut. This shortcut was a gravel path that went through a wooded area. It helped her reach home about 15 minutes faster. However, the path was not very safe or comforting. The houses along the way were far apart, and the trees were thick, making the area feel lonely and quiet. Her father had warned her many times not to use that path. He told her the woods could feel strange, especially when it started getting dark. But she didn't listen. She preferred saving time and getting home faster. Along this shortcut, there was an old house. It looked broken and forgotten. The walls were damaged, the windows were covered in dust, and the yard was full of junk and rusted items. It looked like no one had lived there for years. Every time she passed that house, she felt uncomfortable. To deal with the silence, she would hum or sing to herself. The sound of her own voice made her feel less alone. One afternoon, after finishing her classes, she noticed the sky changing. Dark clouds began to cover the sky, turning it a deep purple color. A storm was coming. The air felt heavy and the afternoon started to feel like evening. She didn't want to get caught in the rain, so she quickly decided to take the shortcut again. Even though it was getting darker, she thought it would help her reach home faster. Soon, heavy rain began to fall. Thunder roared loudly in the sky. The wind picked up, pushing against her as she walked. She lowered her head and started walking faster. As she moved deeper into the woods, the trees began to sway wildly in the wind. The branches moved in all directions, making the place feel even more frightening. For a moment, she thought about turning back and going toward the college again. But then she realized she had already come too far. It was shorter to keep going. So, she continued. When she reached near the end of the path, she came close to the old, broken house. By now, she was almost running. Her heart was beating fast, both from fear and from trying to escape the storm. As she passed the house, she suddenly felt the urge to look up. She glanced at one of the upper windows, and then she froze. There was something there. A dark shape stood behind the glass. It looked like a person, but what scared her the most were the eyes. Two faint red lights were staring directly at her. They were still, watching her. Her breath stopped for a moment. A cold feeling spread through her body, colder than the rain soaking her clothes. Without thinking, she turned and ran. She ran as fast as she could, not looking back even once. When she reached home, she pushed the door open and rushed inside. She was completely wet and shaking. Her father was already inside, having left the fields because of the storm. Her mother was in the kitchen, finishing dinner. She tried to speak, but struggled to catch her breath. Finally, she told them what she had seen. The dark figure and the glowing red eyes in the window. Her parents listened carefully. Her father was upset that she had taken the shortcut again, especially after he had warned her so many times. But when he saw how scared she was, his anger softened. He knew she wasn't lying. She had truly been frightened. A few days later, when the weather became normal again, her fear slowly turned into curiosity. Her father decided they should go together and check the house. So one day they walked down the gravel path toward the old house. When they reached it, they found something unexpected. The house was not empty. An elderly couple had been living there for many years. The woman had recently passed away, and her husband was very old and sick. He had been stuck in bed for weeks and was unable to take care of the house. That explained why the place looked so abandoned. Later, the young woman's mother learned more details from someone at the hospital who knew the old man. The man was grieving deeply after losing his wife. To remember her, he had made something special. He had placed a photo of his wife inside a frame and added small red LED lights around it. He kept this frame near the window. At night, the lights would glow. From outside, it looked like two red eyes in the darkness. Even after hearing this explanation, the young woman still felt uneasy. Something about the red lights and the way they appeared in the window stayed with her. She didn't want to think about it too much. From that day on, she never used the shortcut again. She decided that reaching home a little late was much better than feeling that kind of fear again. Her life slowly returned to normal. She continued going to college and walking home, but now she always took the longer road. The extra 15 minutes didn't bother her anymore. Sometimes she would think about the old man in the broken house. She imagined him sitting alone, surrounded by memories, with the soft red glow of the lights beside him. But she preferred to keep that world separate from hers. For her, home meant warmth, safety, and comfort. The smell of her mother's cooking and the sight of her father coming in from the fields were enough to make her feel at peace. As time passed, the seasons changed. In summer, thick leaves covered the view of the old house. In winter, it stood out clearly against the gray sky. To others in the town, it was just an old building. But to her, it was a reminder that something ordinary can suddenly feel strange and frightening. Eventually, she finished her studies and moved on to the next stage of her life. But she never forgot the lesson she had learned. She understood the value of safety and the importance of listening to advice from those who cared about her. The town continued its quiet and steady life, and the story of the red eyes remained only with her, a memory of fear that later made sense, but still felt unsettling. She found comfort in knowing that most mysteries in the world have simple explanations, even if they seem scary at first. Still, she always chose the safer path. And whenever she walked home, she stayed on the main road, far away from the silent woods and the glowing red eyes.
This happened roughly 3 years ago, well before the pandemic, while I was still a university student. I had returned to my hometown just before the start of my summer term. My old high school friends and I decided to organize a large group hangout. It was wonderful to reconnect with everyone, and the night itself turned out to be excellent. We started at our favorite local pub, and eventually migrated to the town's only nightclub. Afterward, we picked up some food from the takeaway shop across the street. We stood on the pavement, debating whether or not to call a taxi. My friend was firmly against the idea. She insisted that she didn't want to spend the extra money, especially since we had already spent quite a lot throughout the night, buying rounds of drinks. We both lived on the outskirts of the town center, in a more rural area, near our old high school, and our houses were only a 15-minute walk from each other. Because of the proximity, I eventually agreed to walk with her, while the rest of the group huddled together to wait for their taxis. We told the group our plan, and they immediately tried to talk us out of it. They warned us that it was dangerous to be out that late, which was exactly the kind of thing my parents would have said. At the time, I just laughed off their concerns. Our town had a bit of a reputation for being a mess, but it never felt truly dangerous to me. At worst, I figured we might deal with some catcalling. From a teenager in a cheap car down by the council estate, we set off on our way, eating our food. We laughed at the various photos we had captured on Snapchat throughout the evening. I was admittedly a bit drunk, and the weather was freezing. Neither of us had dressed appropriately for the low temperature, so we hurried along. Eventually, we reached the turn-off from my friend's street. She told me to make sure I messaged her the second I got home to let her know I was safe. I promised her I would do exactly that and continued on my way alone. It was a very quiet night, and I felt perfectly safe. Walking down the main road, the street was well lit, and the area was well populated. A few cars drove past me. I felt a sense of satisfaction that I hadn't wasted money on a taxi. The crisp, fresh air was actually helping to sober me up a bit. However, when I was only about 5 minutes away from my front door, I heard the very distinct clicking sound of a bicycle approaching from behind. I didn't think much of it at first, assuming it was just a local lad, or perhaps someone cycling home after a late shift at work. But as I passed the corner shop near my house, which was closed for the night, I heard the sound of heavy panting. I turned my head and saw the silhouette of a middle-aged man wobbling haphazardly on his bike, heading directly toward me. I tried to brush it off, assuming he was either very drunk or under the influence of something. I moved to the edge of the pavement, to give him plenty of room to pass. Instead of cycling by, he steered right up to me and came to a halt. In a slurred voice, while hunching over his handlebars, he asked if we could go home. I was completely unsure of how to handle the situation. Dealing with drunks or people on drugs is one thing in a crowded club, surrounded by your friends, but it is a completely different experience when you are alone at 3 a.m. I was facing a very intoxicated man who could easily overpower me if he decided to. I responded with confusion, telling him I didn't understand what he meant. He continued to slur, calling me sis, claiming that our mother would be angry if we missed tea. The man then leaned forward and made an attempt to grab my hand. Now that he was closer, I could see just how intoxicated he really was. His eyes were completely unfocused and pointing in different directions. It was honestly a miracle that he was still able to stay upright. On the bicycle, I stepped back in a state of growing panic and instinctively reached into my skirt pocket for my keys. It was a self-defense trick I had learned during my first week at university, balling your fist around the keys, so they stick out between your fingers like a claw. I told him firmly that I was not his sister. He just blinked at me, swaying dangerously in his seat. He called out the name Julie, and told me again that it was time to go home. For the record, my name is not Julie. This man looked like he could be older than my father, and I had never seen him before in my life. He looked like the standard creepy guy at a pub that most women know to instinctively avoid. Trying to keep the situation from escalating, I put on a polite smile. I remembered from growing up around pubs that being friendly but direct is often the best way to manage people in that state. I told him he should probably head home, because he'd clearly had a bit too much to drink. I even used his own logic against him, smiling and telling him to get going so he wouldn't miss his tea. Internally, I was terrified. My fingers felt like they were losing circulation because I was gripping my keys so tightly. After a long moment of confused silence, he finally began to cycle unsteadily away from me. I stood there, completely frozen, feeling my heart hammering against my ribs as I watched him slowly pedal up a slight incline of the street toward the council estate at the top of the hill. Just when I thought I was in the clear, he stopped again. He was positioned almost at the entrance of my specific street, and he turned around to stare back down at me. My heart felt like it was going to burst from the sheer terror of the moment. Thinking quickly, I grabbed my phone and began walking back in the direction I had just come from. I immediately called my friend, the one I had parted ways with only minutes before. Thankfully, she picked up after only 2 rings. I quietly begged her to stay on the line with me as I stumbled back toward the shop. While she was panicking on the other end of the phone and asking what was happening, I stole a glance over my shoulder. I saw the man's wobbling figure finally disappear into the estate at the top of the hill. A massive wave of relief washed over me. I explained everything to my friend. As I turned back around and headed toward my street, keeping my eyes locked on the dark corner where the man had vanished, I realized now that I was lucky. The man was likely just very confused and drunk rather than malicious. However, I know things could have ended very differently. Since that night, I never take the risk of walking alone. I always take a taxi or make sure a male friend walks me all the way to my door.
Target was my favorite store, but I don't think I can ever go back. A terrible experience can ruin your love for a place, and that's what happened to me. It all started after I graduated college. I was a psychology major and struggled to find a job. The only psychology job I could find wanted 10 years of experience. I had to take whatever job I could get. I ended up working at some funky call center. It was a complete dumpster fire every single day. The managers had no idea what was going on. My co-workers were some of the weirdest people I'd ever seen. Most didn't have a college education, which made me feel really bad about myself. I had low confidence and felt like a failure. I still lived with my parents and had massive student debt. I was working at a call center, making minimum wage. I had also let myself go during my last few months of senior year. I was really stressed out trying to pass. I just didn't have time to make salad or go for runs anymore. I was feeling really down for a bit, and this is where James comes in. He was a really weird guy that worked at the call center too. He had a goofy looking mustache and was a bit of a creep. I saw him checking me out a few times. I even saw him look at other girls too. A little pervy, but I couldn't expect anything less from a place like this. Oddly enough, James was the only guy who was ever nice to me. Everyone else was so miserable to be there. James had been hired a couple of weeks before I got the job. I guess it just didn't have enough time to make us completely miserable yet. There was one time when I went out for a smoke break. James joined me and started flirting. He definitely had his problems, but there was something about getting a little attention that made me feel special. I was always a very introverted person and hadn't had a boyfriend in over 2 years. It felt nice to be noticed. Soon we exchanged numbers and started talking outside of work. There were a few weeks there that I kept trying to get him to shave his mustache. I told him he would look a lot better. It took about 3 weeks to finally get through to him. When he did, I was surprised. He was actually a really handsome guy under that caterpillar. That's when I made up my mind. If he made a move on me, I wasn't gonna say no. He never made a move on me though. I was surprised because I was sending some pretty strong signals for him to do so. He just never did, not even over text messages. All he would ever do was flirt. It wasn't long into that situation that I gave up on him. I figured he didn't like me. I mean, honestly, what else was I supposed to think? I downloaded Tinder like everyone else. I knew my situation was bad, and I secretly fantasized about hooking up with some rich guy. I didn't find a buff millionaire, but I did find a really nice guy. We went on a few dates and started going out together regularly. I really liked him. We're still together, by the way. But this is where things got weird with James. He started acting differently. He started doing more and more inappropriate things. I was friends with James on Facebook. When I changed my status to in a relationship, he put an angry face emoji. I remember seeing it and rolling my eyes. Typical man, I thought. They don't want you until you have someone else. Something James would always do with me is send slightly naked pictures. It wasn't like full frontal or anything like that. But he would take racy photos of himself getting out of the shower or changing. I was okay with it when I was single, but he just didn't stop. These new pictures were much more revealing, if you know what I mean. I kept telling him that I was in a relationship and he couldn't do this anymore. He just wouldn't listen. He always said that he forgot. I knew he was doing it intentionally. Things also got really awkward at work. There were quite a few things that he would do that were just freaky. For example, pens started disappearing from my desk. I didn't think anything of it at first. I just thought I was being clumsy. But one day I happened to walk by James's desk. I noticed all of my pens there. He also followed me outside every time I went on a smoke break. He always played it off like he wasn't doing anything, but it was so obvious to everyone. It was around the 6-month mark of me working at that funky call center. I had my performance review and got a raise. I got an extra $1 an hour, which I was pretty happy about. I had a few $100s in savings. I decided to treat myself to my favorite store, Target. I remember making a self-congratulatory post on Facebook about it. I even mentioned that I was going to treat myself to some new sheets from Target. I remember getting comments from some of my friends and former classmates. They all congratulated me. I was really excited. Sure, I had a stupid job, but I was making the best of my situation. I remember getting to Target at about 6 or 7 on a Friday night. I went alone. I walked into the store and went over to the bedding aisle. I really wanted to pick out the best sheets for me. I'm a little OCD about fabric and how things feel, so I was running my hands across the sheets to find the one that I liked the best. That was when something unexpected happened. I felt a kiss on my neck. I had been so wrapped up in feeling sheets that I didn't even notice who was behind me. I immediately thought it was my boyfriend. I mean, who else would randomly kiss me in public, right? Well, you guessed it. It was James. I turned around after he kissed me. I was smiling, but my giddiness turned to disgust when I saw that it was him. My stomach dropped. I wanted to scream, but I just couldn't bring myself to do anything. I was more in shock than anything else. I know I must have looked so repulsed, but that didn't stop him. He pinned me up against the aisle rack and continued to kiss me. He shoved his entire tongue down my throat. It was honestly disgusting. This probably went on for about 3 or 4 seconds. Then I finally snapped out of it. I pulled my head away and slapped him across the face as hard as I could. I told him that I never wanted to see him again. I fell down onto my back, and I just sat there telling him to please leave me alone. He stood there though, looking down at me, smiling. James was a really freaky guy. He started getting on top of me and kissing me again. That was when I finally screamed at the top of my lungs. Someone who must have been in an aisle over or two overheard and came running. He was a man who looked like he was in his 30s. He ripped James off of me and threw him against the wall. After that, James took off. The man was really nice to me. He helped me up and made sure I was okay. He asked if I wanted to call the police. I was so shocked I just told him no in the moment. That wouldn't be the last time that I saw James. We still work at the same call center. My God, it's pretty awkward. I know he still creeps on my Facebook and he looks at me all the time. I'm honestly not sure what to do about it. I haven't even told my boyfriend about what happened. Honestly, I'm kind of afraid to. But I seriously might have to one of these days.
This incident happened to my best friend about 3 years ago. She was 19 back then and was working with an international company for client dealing processes. I don't have a whole lot of information about her work, but the one thing I know was that she was getting more than enough for her work. So let us begin her story. She was doing her regular work in her office when she got a call from her old school friend. Her friend invited her to a reunion party that was being held in her hometown. She was away from her family and friends for so long, so she agreed at once. She booked a ticket, and the next day, she prepared everything to leave for her hometown. She took her luggage and booked an Uber for the airport. Her cab was about to arrive in the next 7 minutes, so she waited there until the cab arrived. She went to the cab and shared the OTP to confirm her ride. Later, she loaded her luggage inside the car and jumped in. The driver was wearing a mask and only half of his face was visible to her. Even then, his face looked a little creepy and he had a huge scar on his face from his right eye to his forehead. It looked like someone cut through his whole face with a sharp object. She was getting some strange vibes, but she had no time to think about such things, so she asked him to move on. He started the car and moved ahead. During the whole trip, he didn't say anything to her, and neither did she. After driving for continuous 40 minutes, she finally reached the airport, and here came the twist. She paid for her trip and tried to get out of the car, but before she could do anything, several cops came running and surrounded the car while pointing the gun toward her and the driver. She couldn't understand anything. The cops were continuously shouting to get out of the car. She hadn't done anything wrong, so she had no worries, but even then, she had a horrifying expression on her face. She put her hand behind her neck and got out of the car. The cops surrounded her and took a few steps away from the car while pointing the gun at my friend's chest. She was so scared, but continuously screaming that she had done nothing and was innocent. The driver also faced the same action as her and was taken just beside her. The cops asked him to remove his mask, and this was the first time she saw his face. His face was creepy even more than when she saw him with the mask. He was continuously staring at my best friend with his dangerous eyes. She turned her face and stood right there. The cops began searching the car and took her luggage out of the car. They searched every corner of the car, and just beside my friend's luggage, they found a small bag that was not her belongings. Later, they opened each of her luggages and checked it as well. She was watching all her belongings being thrown in the dust, but there was nothing she could have done right then. Also, this was their duty, and they were bound to do all this. She let them do what they were doing and remained standing there just beside them. They checked all her luggage, but found nothing suspicious there. But at last, it was the turn of the small bag, which was not hers. So she was completely out of worries, as she thought that the bag belonged to the cab driver. The cops opened the bag and found some white packets there. She started thinking what that could have been. Soon she was surprised to hear that the package which they got from the small bag was drugs. She had no idea that the cab driver was that kind of person, but she believed it, as his face was already too creepy to prove him a subject in this matter. The cops pulled their guns and pointed toward them. She was in fear, so she screamed that it was not her belongings, but the cab driver might be the one behind all this. But he completely rejected this fact and blamed my friend for everything. He also told the cops that the bag was not his belongings, but she had taken that bag along with his other entire luggage. He tried to act like an innocent who didn't even know the meaning of drugs. She kept on shouting that she was innocent, but the cops took both of them into their custody, as both of them were the suspects and both of them were blaming each other. So the cops took them for interrogation. My friend, who was going to a party celebration with her friend, ended up behind the bars. She was totally confused and horrified because she knew about the police torture. She kept on telling them that she was innocent, but none of them listened. They even took their phones and ID cards so that she couldn't contact anyone. She was in jail with that creepy driver, who was the main mastermind behind all this. She was there for the next 3 hours, and meanwhile, she tried her best to convince the cops that she was innocent, but no one cared about her. Finally, the cops came to her to listen to her urge, and she explained everything. She told him everything in detail, and she also asked them to confirm her identity if they don't believe her. The cops looked decent, and he believed her and let her talk to her mother. She talked to her and explained everything. Her mother asked her not to cry and wait until she arrived with an advocate. She was there for the whole night, and due to stress, she couldn't get to sleep the whole night. The next morning, her parents came to her and proved her identity. They also hired an advocate for her, who spoke on their behalf, and finally, she was proven innocent. The cab driver was the real culprit, and he had many other fraud cases charged against him. The cops apologized to her for their mistake and let her go. She went with her parents happy, and the next day, she enjoyed the reunion party with her friends. She forgot everything soon, and then returned to her work. I am her colleague, and after returning from her hometown, she told me everything she experienced. Now she is married and left this country with her husband. It had been so long since she contacted me, and she even changed her contact number. I thought of sharing this story today because this was the same day when she told me this story.
I have spent the majority of my life living in Utah, with the exception of a few years spent in Wyoming. For the past couple of years, I have worked as an Uber Eats driver throughout the Utah area. The events I am about to describe took place only about 5 days ago. I had just finished up a long shift of delivering food and was catching up with my mother over the phone. During our conversation, I had the sudden idea to go find an old apartment complex where we had lived when I was much younger. Under normal circumstances, I always carry my new 9mm pistol with me for protection. However, on this particular day, I had left it at home. I decided to drive back to my house first to pick it up. I did not want to find myself in a bad situation without any form of defense. My mother had helped me by doing some research on the address. Back when I was a child, the complex was known as Midtown Villa. It was a quiet place back then and was never known for having any gang activity. Once I had the address, I entered it into Google Maps and began the drive over there. When I finally pulled into the complex, I noticed that the name had been changed to the Calaveras. The buildings and grounds actually looked much better and more updated than they did years ago. Because the area looked nice, I allowed myself to let my guard down. Looking back on that decision now, I regret it deeply. I began driving slowly through the apartment complex while still talking to my mother on the phone. We agreed to switch the call to a video chat so that I could show her all the new upgrades and changes. I pulled back through the entrance off the main road and started pointing out the specific building that used to be ours. Right next to it was an empty lot. I explained that the lot used to be a playground. This was where I made my first few mistakes. First, I was holding up a phone to show my mother the surroundings, which likely made it look like I was recording the people nearby. Second, I was pointing my finger at various buildings and areas. Third, I was in a dangerous area but had mistakenly lowered my guard. The reason these details matter is that I passed a man and a woman. I was pointing my hand in their direction. To me, it was a harmless trip down memory lane, but to them, it appeared that I was recording them or targeting them. I had unknowingly angered someone. Even though I now had my 9mm with me and a loaded magazine, I started making some odd choices because I am a very direct person. As I continued driving forward, I realized the man was chasing my car. He was yelling at me and calling me out. He was asking me if I wanted to tussle or fight him. He continued running toward my car and started taking photos of my vehicle and my license plate. Suddenly, I realized I needed to move. I sped up and made up my mind to get out of there immediately. The events that followed were influenced by the fact that I have extensive tactical training. However, in that moment, my adrenaline was pumping hard. Instead of using that energy to stay calm, I let it control my actions. With my mother still watching on video chat, I noticed a car pulling up quickly. I took off, but the car stayed right on my tail. I made a left turn, and they made a left turn. I made a right turn, and they followed with a right turn. I made the same turn again, and they were still there. I drove up to 9000 South and took a right after coming to a stop. I tried to tell myself I was paranoid, but I was wrong. They followed me all the way to 1300 West. I turned right again, and the same car followed me. I will not lie, I was incredibly nervous. Multiple scenarios were playing out in my head. I knew I was in a legitimate crisis. I knew that if it came down to a physical confrontation, I had my pistol ready. Many people would say I should have dialed 911 immediately. However, I am the type of person who rarely asks for help, and I felt I could handle getting out of this on my own. While I was weighing my options, I decided to turn right. I turned onto 7800 South. The following car did the same. Fortunately, a semi-truck managed to get between us, acting as a temporary barrier right behind my bumper. I felt a brief sense of relief. Eventually, the semi-truck turned left. Once the barrier was gone, I knew I had to make a definitive move. I decided to turn left toward the light that leads to 7200 South, where the I-15 on-ramp was located. I didn't fully consider what would happen if they continued to pursue me at high speeds. What happened next serves as a reminder to always ask for help when you need it. As I made the left turn, they followed and began speeding up in the lane to my right. Fearing they would pull up next to me and escalate the situation, I immediately used my signal and swerved. I moved in front of them. I then slowed down a little to control the space. They quickly moved into the left lane and sped up to get alongside me again. I accelerated to match them. Just as we both hit 90 miles per hour, I slammed on my brakes with everything I had. They also slammed on their brakes, but they suddenly veered and turned right. If I had been in that spot, they could have hit me, causing my car to roll. I could have been killed or ended up in the hospital. Instead, they sped off, and I bolted for the interstate. I drove all the way to a grocery store near my house where I felt safe enough to stop. From there, I called the police department responsible for the area near the apartment complex. I explained the entire situation to the dispatcher. The dispatcher told me that I should have called 911 the moment it started. They explained that they could have directed me to a nearby police station. An officer eventually called me back to discuss the incident. He told me that the specific area around those apartments was very problematic and full of gang activity. He told me my judgment was accurate. I made sure to complete the official report right then because I wanted my version of events on the record first. I didn't want the police knocking on my door later based on the man's photos. After finishing the report, I finally went home. I didn't let my guard down until I was inside and knew I was safe. I told my fiancée about the encounter the next day. She was worried and told me never to deliver food in that area again without making sure I had protection. Looking back, there are 3 main lessons. First, never leave yourself without defense. Second, always ask for help or call the authorities when your life is at stake. Third, never be naive about your surroundings, no matter how nice they look. I hope this never happens to anyone else. Just remember, the people you really have to watch out for are not the ones with holsters. It is the ones who hide their weapons in their waistbands. Stay safe.
I can't forget that horrible moment that happened to me about 2 years ago. No matter how hard I try to forget, that incident left a deep mark on my mind. I never expected something like that to happen ever in my life, but just because of that incident, even now, I'm scared to go somewhere alone in an Uber cab. I don't know if other girls have experienced something like this or not, but even then, I thought that my story might teach someone at least something. I was only 19 at that time. Recently, I got a job in a bank and was working as a bank manager. My office was about 2 hours away from my home, but I had my car, so traveling was not hard for me. My father was a businessman and my mother was a doctor, so our way of living was perfect, and we had no worries about money and expenses. I used to go to my office daily at 9 a.m. and return at 6 p.m. My father was away from home often due to his business trips and other meetings and business stuff, and my mother worked in a nearby hospital, so she returned home before me. I also had a younger brother who was 14 only. One particular day, I was not feeling well, so I went to the office a little later than usual. It was already noon when I reached there. I arrived late but needed to complete my shift, so I worked till 8 p.m. And after completing my shift, I decided to return home. I had no fear as I had traveled all the times many times before, so I put my purse inside the car and hopped in. I put the key into the keyhole and turned it to start the engine, but it didn't. I tried again, but nothing happened. I tried many times, but nothing happened. It seemed like there was some problem with the engine, so I hopped out of the car and went inside the office again to get someone to help me. Fortunately, I found my colleague who was also my good friend. I asked him for my help and explained the whole situation. He came with me and tried to drive himself, but the car didn't start. He tried again and again, but nothing seemed to be working. Finally, he got out of the car and told me that I should get a mechanic. Our office was a little far from the town area, so it was not easy for me to go and take a mechanic with me to repair my car. I was stressed as it was already 9 p.m. and I had gotten 2 calls from my mother. I was being impatient. So after watching me so stressed out, he asked me to book a cab and return home today, and he would make my car repaired and then leave it at my home. I was not ready for this at first as I didn't want to disturb him, but I was already late and my health was also not in my favor. He booked an Uber for me and stayed there till the cab arrived. It took almost 10 minutes for the cab to reach there. He asked me to get in and return home. Meanwhile, he will take my car and get it repaired. He was a good and kind friend, so I trusted him and got into the car. He shared the OTP with the driver and asked him to take me to my home. I was already stressed, so I didn't notice the driver and kept looking out the window. After a few minutes of driving, I noticed that he was continuously turning his head to look at me and smiling while looking at my face. His creepy smile, oh my god, I couldn't forget that in my whole life. His eyes were filled with lust, and it seemed like he was going to eat me alive any moment. At first I ignored him and continued to look outside, but he was doing the same thing again and again, which irritated me after a few minutes. I shouted at him in a loud tone and told him to focus on the route, not me. He turned his face and didn't turn back for the next few minutes. I thought he got his lesson and didn't repeat this, but I was wrong. After a few minutes, I noticed that he was doing something with the driver's mirror. After a few seconds, I came to know that he was adjusting the mirror in such a way that he could easily see me. Now this all was getting frustrating with every passing minute. I decided to calm myself down and ignore him. I turned my face and decided not to look at him, but I couldn't do so. He was continuously staring at me, and I was getting pissed off at his actions. I shouted again and told him, "Don't you mind your bullshit, just look ahead and drive." This time I was a little rougher than last time, and he deserved that, but he was made of a thick skin. My words didn't do anything well. Till that time, I had only passed half the way and couldn't get to leave the car as it was already 10 p.m. the night. It was not safe for me, so I told myself that there was no point in telling him anything. It was better to bear with him for the next hour until I reached home. All of a sudden, he started opening his zip and pulled his penis out of his pants. I was completely stunned after seeing this. I couldn't believe my eyes that I was watching someone holding his 6-inch long penis in his hand right in front of me. I was feeling embarrassed, so I hid my face behind the seat and peeped at him. He started to masturbate while looking into the mirror. I wanted to tell him to stop this nonsense, but I don't know why I couldn't speak. It was like somehow my words got trapped in my throat and didn't come out. He was continuously driving while masturbating. The only good thing was that I was on the right route to my home. I decided not to look at him for the rest of the time. He continued with his masturbation again and again, and his sperm was spread all around his feet. I couldn't do anything, but I was in great fear. I didn't say anything to him. Fortunately, after a few minutes, I reached my home. He looked at me and shouted, "Ma'am, we have reached the destination. Please pay for the trip, as I have another trip to attend." I opened my eyes and looked up. The driver was looking at me, and I was in front of my home. That time, I knew that what I was seeing was all in my dream, and I was in deep sleep the whole way. The driver was a kind old man, the same age as my father. I paid for his services and got out of the car. He thanked me and left from there. I went in and found that my mother was waiting for me in the hall. I looked all shocked and was smiling over my crazy dream, so she asked me what happened, but I couldn't tell her, and neither did anyone else until now.
This event took place about 3 or 4 years ago, and it is something that still crosses my mind quite often. During that time, I was back home from college for my summer break. My parents and sister had traveled out of town for a dance competition, which left me responsible for watching the house and looking after our dogs, while the rest of the family was away. It was a weekend night, likely a Friday or Saturday, and I had invited a few friends over. We spent the evening hanging out and drinking before we planned to head to a local bar. We were having such a good time catching up that we lost track of the clock, eventually deciding to leave for the bar around 11:15 p.m. One of my friends, who lived only a 5-minute walk away, suddenly realized he had left his entire wallet and eyed at his house. He decided to run ahead to grab it, while my other friend and I stayed behind for a moment to tidy up. We grabbed a final drink for the walk and started heading toward the other friend's house, where we intended to meet and call an Uber. To provide some context, my parents live in a quiet residential neighborhood just on the outskirts of the city. The area is mostly inhabited by families and elderly couples, so it is usually very peaceful. As my friend and I began our walk, we noticed a man walking a German Shepherd a short distance behind us. He was heading in the same direction we were. We both found it a bit odd that someone would be out walking a dog so close to midnight on a weekend, but we tried to ignore it and kept walking. We were 21 at the time, carrying our drinks and talking, trying to enjoy the night. However, as we got closer to our destination, my friend leaned in and whispered his concern that the man behind us was actually gaining ground and getting closer. I took a nervous look over my shoulder, but told him he was wrong, mostly because I didn't want us to panic. I looked back at my friend, but he glanced back again and shouted in fear, confirming that the man was indeed closing in. Right as he said that, I looked back and saw the man and his dog break into a full-on sprint toward us. Terrified, we dropped our cups and started running as fast as we could. When we reached my friend's house, we scrambled up the driveway to the side door, but to our horror, it was locked. We began banging on the door desperately, certain that the man and the dog were about to attack us. Instead of attacking, the man and his dog stopped at the end of the driveway and simply stared at us. My friend yelled out, demanding to know what he wanted and why he had chased us. Now that we had a better look, we could see he was an older man. In a scruffy, rough voice, he told us that we were trespassing. We both shouted back immediately, explaining that this was our friend's home, and we were just waiting for him to come outside. I was struggling to catch my breath, but managed to ask him if he was supposed to be the neighborhood watch. He simply confirmed that he was. My family has lived in that same house for my entire life, and I had never heard a single mention of a neighborhood watch, especially not one that patrolled the streets at midnight with a dog. After that brief exchange, the man and his dog turned around and walked away. There was a large brick wall bordering the driveway that blocked our view once they moved past it. Almost immediately after they vanished, my friend finally stepped out of the house with his wallet. He told us to be quiet because his parents were sleeping and asked what all the shouting was about. Our Uber pulled up at that exact moment. As I ran toward the car, at the end of the driveway, I looked down the street in the direction the man had gone, but I saw absolutely nothing. I asked the Uber driver if he had passed a man walking a German Shepherd on his way in. The driver told us that he hadn't seen anyone at all, even though he had just come from the exact direction the man had walked. I have never seen that man or his dog again, and the memory of that night still haunts me.
In July of 1996, 24 years ago, I reached the end of my term of service with the Army. I was stationed at Fort Hood, Texas, and I made the firm decision that, at the stroke of midnight, I would complete my out-processing and begin the long drive back home to Wisconsin. For the entire duration of that day, I was so filled with an intense, restless anxiety about leaving that I found it nearly impossible to get any rest. When 11:45 p.m. finally arrived, I climbed out of bed and headed over to sign out with the desk sergeant. Naturally, knowing that a crowd of people wanted to sign out at the exact same midnight hour, the sergeant decided that was the perfect time for him to go out and perform his rounds. I was stuck in a bureaucratic holding pattern because, according to regulations, I could not leave until I received my final sign-off from him and physically turned in my room key. I waited, and then I waited some more. It was 2:45 a.m. when he finally returned to his desk. I turned in my key, secured the necessary sign-off, and by 3:30, I was finally on my way. At the start of the drive, I was fueled by so much raw adrenaline that I felt I could easily drive for days without stopping. Unfortunately, that surge of energy was fleeting. By the time I was pushing through the traffic around Dallas, I was nodding off at the wheel. I decided that just past the city of Denton, I would pull over at the next rest stop to take a quick nap until the sun came up. I was struggling immensely to keep my eyes open by the time I reached a stop. I pulled over, got out of my car to stretch, get some fresh air and throw away some trash, all while taking a look at my immediate surrounding. There were only about 3 other cars and 2 semi-trucks scattered in the lot. It was a picnic stop rather than a formal rest area, which meant there were no restrooms. I tossed my trash into a bin and glanced at a posted flyer featuring a few missing persons, though I admit I didn't pay any real attention to the details on it. I walked back to my car, which was a basic no-frills Geo Metro. It was a stripped-down model. No radio, no power windows, and no power locks. I cracked the windows, turned on the portable boombox I had brought for music, and lay down to get some sleep. I had only been asleep for maybe 5 or 10 minutes when I felt my car shake just slightly. I cracked one eye open and looked around, but I did not see anything, so I dismissed it and went back to sleep. A moment later, I heard the distinct sound of my door handle being pulled and heard scratching on the door keyhole. I sat up quickly, but I did not see anyone there. I scanned all the windows and saw no one, so I shrugged it off as the product of being exhausted and laid back down, turning the radio up a bit louder. Being a Texas night in July, it was stiflingly hot, but I was so tired that I simply lay back down and tried to rest. A few minutes later, I heard the door handle being tested again, and this time, the car shook significantly. I sat up fast and saw a man standing at the passenger side looking directly in. Even though it was hot and humid, he was wearing a red sweatshirt with the hood pulled up, and I could not see his face. Because I was young, stubborn, and just out of the military, I yelled at him, demanding to know what he wanted. He just stared at me blankly, and I climbed out of the car. I am only 5'6", but I was absolutely livid. He simply turned and walked off toward the picnic tables as if nothing had happened. All the while, I was yelling at him that if he came back, I would take him out. I decided I would just drive on from there, so I got back in and continued on my way. Even though I was quite upset, only about 10 miles down the road, I was dangerously tired again. Luckily, About 10 miles further down I-35, there was another picnic stop. I was not sure why North Texas didn't have actual rest areas, but they didn't. I pulled into the second picnic stop and backed into a parking spot just in case I needed to leave quickly. For some reason, there was only one other car there and no semi-trucks. I locked the doors again, cracked the windows, and turned on my boombox. I fell asleep instantly. About 30 minutes later, I heard a loud thud on my driver's side window. I jumped up and looked around, but no one was there. I got out of the car, which was quite stupid, but I had my macho military attitude going. Still, no one was around. I assumed it was just my nerves from the previous stop. I got back into my car, locked the doors again, and closed my eyes. This time, I was too amped up to fall asleep, so I just lay there with my eyes closed. I felt that someone was looking at me. I opened my eyes and saw the same guy standing there again in the red sweatshirt, hood up. I could not see his eyes, but I could see that he was smiling at me. I popped up quickly and tried to open the door to bump him with it. Being a cheap Geo, since the doors were locked, it didn't open. He walked backwards, still staring at me. By the time I got out, he was about 30 feet away, facing me. It was fairly dark, but as I looked him over, I could see he was really skinny and about 6'2" or 6'3". I still felt like I could take him with my military experience. He was wearing the red hooded sweatshirt, blue jeans, and green tennis shoes. For some reason, I thought the shoes looked odd. I could see something shine every now and then as he stood there staring at me, and I honestly believe it was a machete. I quickly reached into my back seat, grabbed my baseball bat, and started yelling at him to come get some. I am not really sure why I said that. He started walking toward me, and I took a few steps toward him, not really thinking. As I got about 5 feet away from my car, and he was now about 15 feet from me, a yellow van pulled up quickly and parked just off to the side of the road. I finally realized what was happening, and I saw 2 other guys also wearing hooded sweatshirts in the van. Before they could get out, I ran back to my car. I had left the keys in the ignition. Since I had backed in, I was able to cut the wheel hard to the right and peel my car out of there. I was so lucky that, being a manual transmission, I didn't stall the car because the other 2 guys were already out of the van, and the first guy was just about at my car. I jumped back on the interstate and didn't stop until I was about 20 miles into Oklahoma. I stopped for gas and to use the restroom. Inside, I noticed that same flyer I had barely glanced at the first picnic stop. It was a flyer with several missing persons on it, warning people not to stop for long periods of time at the rest areas. It described a possible suspect as being roughly 6 feet tall, wearing blue jeans, green shoes, and a red hooded sweatshirt. I completely went white. Needless to say, since it was daylight, I drove the rest of the way to Wisconsin, wide awake. I am not sure why, but I never reported it to the number on the flyer or told anyone about it. But now I live in North Texas and pass those 2 picnic stops every day on my way to work, and I think about that night quite often.
I prefer not to get too specific with the details here, but I am sure you will understand why being a bit paranoid is the wise choice by the time I finish this account. I have been into urban exploring, or urbex, as it is commonly called now, for as long as I can remember. This interest likely stems from being an extreme introvert. While other children were playing together on jungle gyms and swing sets, I preferred being off on my own, exploring some hidden corner of the park or whatever area we happened to be in at the time. By the time I reached my teenage years, I was targeting larger and more significant locations. On weekends, I would travel across town on my bike to tag derelict buildings with spray paint. In my 20s, I began traveling across the Northeast to visit classic locations as well as lesser-known abandoned spots that had not been scouted out very well by others in the community. Despite my travels, I had 2 or 3 favorite haunts in my hometown that I would visit once or twice a year just to see how they were progressing. In reality, they were regressing. But the point remains. These buildings would accumulate filth, become homes for various animals, or occasionally house people. Graffiti artists would come and go, and there was something truly nice about watching these structures age over time. Of all the places where I thought I might come close to losing my life, it certainly was not in these local spots. I knew them like the back of my hand, and they were my favorites because they felt relatively safe. However, the story takes a turn from there. I was wandering around a large old industrial complex, marveling at how nature was slowly reclaiming the land, one cracked paving slab at a time. Eventually, I stopped to eat some sandwiches I had packed, sitting in the office of an old factory that overlooked the main shop floor. All the glass had been smashed out, and I sat in a filthy old chair trying to eat as cleanly as possible. Suddenly, I began to hear voices. At first, I worried that it might be security or the police. I did not think the place had any active cameras or that I had been spotted by anyone on duty, and I felt angry at myself for being careless. As the voices grew louder, I realized they did not sound like police at all, but they were definitely headed into the same building. I wondered what they were doing there, and unfortunately, I soon found out. The men began discussing a situation that sounded like bad news. One man explained that someone had been caught with 12 kilograms of product and was likely going to inform on the group. A second man suggested they could deal with him in county jail, but the real problem was the names he might drop before then, which could lead back to them. The first man questioned if they even knew who had been named, arguing that they could not simply eliminate 6 people on the assumption that they would all turn state's evidence. The second man insisted they had no choice, and a third man agreed, noting that there was almost $500,000 at stake. He stated they could not afford to take chances and that everyone involved had to go. The first man was shocked, asking if they were truly going to kill 6 of their own people. The third man firmly repeated his order to get it done, and to eliminate anyone who had knowledge of the situation. I could not believe what I was hearing. It was some kind of murderous criminal conspiracy, likely over drugs or other illegal imports, happening just meters away from me. At that moment, I tried to think of the worst thing that could possibly happen. Aside from a catastrophic natural disaster, the one thing you would never want to happen in that situation is for your phone to suddenly go off. Just as the men were about to leave, I received a call. I did not even see who was calling. I simply mashed the volume button to silence the ringtone. Immediately, I heard one of them demand to know who was there, followed by the sound of running. I ran harder and faster than I ever had in my life. If I had not known the layout of the complex so perfectly, I might not be here to tell this story today. I was so terrified that I did not even go home that night. Instead, I went to another one of my favorite abandoned spots and stayed there until morning. I only left when I was absolutely certain that I was not being followed. Looking back, I do not think they saw my face, and they probably assumed I was an undercover officer. Nothing ever came of the incident, and since I had no idea who the men were, I could not follow their case in the news. It was the scariest thing that ever happened to me while urban exploring, and it taught me to always expect the unexpected.
In high school, I was on the volleyball team, and despite being pretty good at the game, I was always the center of jokes for being lean by the muscular guys on my team. Though I always laughed at the joke, it stung like a bee. One day I was standing there with my so-called friends, minding my own business, when I overheard Marty comment on my legs being similar to those of a flamingo. Before I could even react, he and Pablo erupted in laughter, as if they had just heard the funniest joke in the world. But the joke was on me, because they didn't even need to mention my name for me to understand that they were talking about me. The hurt and embarrassment I felt were overwhelming. I couldn't bear the thought of staying in that locker room, so I fled without even bothering to change into my team uniform. I turned off my phone so no one could contact me and ran to a nearby park, where I sat on a bench for hours, lost in thought. All I could think about were the insults and cruel words they had hurled at me. It was clear to me that none of them had ever cared about my feelings. It was then that I made a decision. I would show them that I was more than just a target for their jokes. I would join the gym and work on my appearance until I was strong and confident. They would see that their words had no power over me. My neighborhood had a gym, so I decided to go there. However, the thought of being ridiculed by my friends for my physique if they saw me there made me dread the idea. To avoid such embarrassment, I planned to go there right before closing, hoping no one would be there. Upon entering the gym, I was greeted by the sounds of clanking weights and the smell of sweat. I noticed a female instructor aligning the equipment and putting it in their places. She seemed to be the only instructor present at that time. With a hesitant approach, I walked over to her. her piercing gaze making me uneasy. After scanning me from head to toe, she finally spoke, her voice laced with skepticism. She explained the timing and membership plans, but her tone made me feel like an outsider. Although I wanted to try out the gym first before deciding if I wanted to continue with my membership, I couldn't muster the courage to say it out loud. It felt like the instructor had already decided about me, and I didn't want to give her any reason to think less of me. Eventually, I did what she told me to do before exiting the gym, feeling disappointed and demotivated. As I walked away from the gym, I couldn't help but notice a group of young men around my age giggling and playfully pushing each other as they made their way inside. I wondered if they were there for the same reason as me. Nevertheless, I didn't pay it much attention and continued walking. Determined to stick to my routine, I had planned to hit the gym at the crack of dawn, 6 a.m., to be precise. So I woke up half an hour before my usual time, took a warm and refreshing shower, put on my most comfortable workout clothes, and set off towards the gym, feeling energized and ready to start my day. Upon arriving outside the gym, a sense of excitement pulsed through me. I had been looking forward to this day. However, my excitement quickly turned to dismay as I was met with a male instructor who informed me that the gym was closed for the day. I turned to find the disappointment etched on the faces of the other gym goers around me too. Suddenly, the sound of police car sirens filled the air, causing everyone to freeze. 2 officers emerged from the car and walked briskly towards the gym entrance. They gave us a stern warning to leave the premises immediately. Confusion and shock washed over me, wondering what could have happened to cause such an abrupt halt to our workout plans. I walked back to my house with confusion still swirling around in my mind. I went about getting ready, but my heart wasn't into it, for I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. The sight of police officers outside the gym was still fresh in my mind. Suddenly, my phone rang, and an unknown number appeared on the screen. I hesitated before answering, but something inside me urged me to pick it up. The voice on the other end introduced himself as Officer Kenneth, his tone serious and stern. He asked me to come to the police station immediately without explaining. My heart started pounding with fear, even though I couldn't think of any reason why the police would want to talk to me. While approaching the looming police station, my heart pounded with anxiety and confusion. The officer's stern and unreadable expressions only added to my unease. Instead of divulging any information, they immediately focused on me and began questioning me about the gym. They wanted to know if I had enrolled during its closing hours, leaving me bewildered and uncertain of the relevance of their inquiry. I nodded in agreement, trying to hide my growing trepidation. The officers continued questioning, demanding to know why it had taken me so long to enroll. I hesitated, feeling as though I was on trial, but eventually explained that I had been terrified of being ridiculed by my friends. They inquired if I had noticed anything or anyone peculiar. After pondering momentarily, I responded that I hadn't seen anything unusual. However, I did recall seeing 4 young boys enter the gymnasium after me, presumably to sign up for a membership. To my surprise, the officers seemed taken aback by my statement and informed me that there was no record of anyone signing up after me. Moreover, they added that the CCTV footage had been stolen, making it impossible to verify my claim. As I handed over the description of the 4 guys to the officers, I could feel my heart beating faster. I was curious about what had happened and couldn't resist asking, excuse me, but may I know what happened? Officer Kenneth took a few seconds to respond, his expression serious. Gym instructor Sarah was kidnapped last night, he said, his voice low and grave. I stood there, petrified for a few seconds, upon realizing that they were probably suspecting me of her kidnapping before I silently walked out of there. The journey back home was a difficult one. Every step felt like a burden, and I could feel the world's weight on my shoulders. I couldn't help but let the tears flow as my mind replayed the day's events. All I wanted was to join the gym to avoid the constant jabs from my friends about my weight. I had hoped that changing my physique would improve my confidence and self-esteem. Little did I know that my decision would lead me to being falsely suspected of something I didn't even do. The sense of injustice and betrayal left me feeling lost and alone, with no one to turn to.
I was new to America. I moved from a place here, and I had no idea where I can get things for a new accommodation that I was provided with the home and a transport to take me to one place to the other. I was from a very small town in Wales, and to be in such a big city was a new one for me. New experiences, new adventures, and new people I got to visit. Being in the city was very transforming for me, as the transitions were tough being from the small town and all. And then, things became quite easier than before. The city was something that I was getting used to. I got the job in the Target corporate office, and I had to move all the way to America for the job that I was in San Francisco now for the job. It was a boring job, so telling the details of the job is a snooze fest in itself that no one should go through. But that is not why I chose the job. I did not choose the job because it was boring, but I took the job because it was a great opportunity to be overseas and to meet with new people and make friends with them and learn the American way of doing things. And it paid really well. So there's nothing bad with being paid good and to be in a country where there are quite a lot of opportunities. I moved to the corporate, and as per the requirement of the job, I had to get to one of the Target stores to operate well and inspect where they were lacking. It was mostly a mix of hands-on involvement and a bit of paperwork to be taken care of. So I went inside this Target. It was already 6 in the evening, and I was already late due to the flight. It was a completely different state that I was in, so I marched in. And as I got close, I saw the physical condition of the store wasn't very good. The Target sign wasn't completely working, and the store wasn't really maintained, and on the outside there was a group of guys that just kept hanging around. That seemed to be one of the reasons too that the store wasn't really performing. I called in the manager and asked him, why are the guys on the outside just hanging around? They are blocking the potential customers, scaring them away from the store, and I told him to tell them to scram away from there. The manager didn't really listen at first, but then I also informed him about the other things. I told him that this is his responsibility to call the corporate office to come and surface the signs. And then when I asked him, I told you to get those boys to get away from the property. Tell them that they cannot hang around the property. They are scaring the customers away. And if there is something of a problem here, let me know. I will put on some sense in them. The man looked at me and then said, okay, I will tell them to go away. And I replied, don't tell them to just go away. Tell them they are not to come here and assemble. If they want to buy something, come right in and buy and leave. Don't gather. And I left to check some other things. And then 10 minutes into my inspection, I saw that there was a nuance created. A ruckus was going on outside the house. And I asked them what is going on. And one of the employees came running and said, sir, it is the manager. They are beating the manager. I quickly left my paperwork in my bag at the very aisle that I was standing at and inspecting, and ran towards the door and out in the area where the boys were hanging, and they were grabbing the manager by the collar and punching him. I got out and I heard one of the tall boys with blackened hair with an evil smile say, something's right, to the manager's face. You don't tell us nothing. Tell whoever shrimp you are working for we are not moving anywhere. And as I got outside, the manager looked at me while he was getting his head bashed in and pointed the finger at me and said in the broken, beaten voice, sir, you tell them to go away. I guess they are not really listening to what I have to say. And then I looked at him, seeing him all beaten on the floor. Hey man, I'm just a tourist. Why are you bringing me in a fight that has nothing to do with me? And I could see the anger and disappointment in the eyes of the manager at that time. Well, this was the corporate America. Everyone had to protect their own ass. So that is exactly what I was doing, or seemed like I was doing. The fight broke off. The manager only got bruises. Nothing was broken, so that was a good start for him. He was really pissed at me for not taking a stand, but I got him a medical grant that the corporate gave in case anybody got injured during work. It was a whopping 50 grand, and he received. And I told him the very reason I did not interfere was to make his case strong. But you see, that is not just the case that I was transferred from Wales to America. I was not the corporate suck-up that I was pretending to be. I was so much more than that. That night, when those idiots beat up our store manager, we were able to gather the information on those hooligans. My line of work involves intimidation, and my job was to make sure that the people who are supposed to be scared of the power of the Target were scared of it. I was keeping the accounts on them. So the boys that seemed not very afraid of that manager in Target had to get the taste of what power Target has. And I was the guy that's sent to rough up guys like them. That same night, I went into their houses and made sure they remember what it feels like to mess with the wrong company, and they were quick to understand. So other than the boring paperwork, there was something else that I brought in from all the way in Wales. I was the accountant that people hoped that they didn't see. My name is Cameron Wheeler, and I'm 26 years old. The incident I'm going to tell you about happened with my sister, who is no more. During this incident, she was killed, but it was her own fault, and just with her little mistake, she lost her life. Her name was Maria, and she was 3 years younger than me. I was the eldest son in the family, Arian was the youngest, and in the middle was Maria. Our parents owned a fabric shop in the nearby market area, and they were always busy with their work. It doesn't mean they didn't love us. They do, and always tried their best to provide us with suitable time, but what can I say? After all, work comes first. I understand them. What they were doing was for the sake of all three of us. I was working in a small game development company, but since I was a newbie, my income was not that much. I had to live a little far away from the birthplace of my work. I rented an apartment, which was not good enough, but I had to adjust because that was the best I could afford with my income. After I was gone, Maria and Aryan were alone at home until Mom and Dad arrived from the shop. Maria was in her final year of graduation, and Aryan was much younger, and he was in his schooling age. Mom and Dad bought a phone and gave them to Maria in case of need as they were alone at home. Everything was going well, and Maria fell in love with the guy whom she matched with on Instagram. We had no idea for how long she had been in a relationship with them. She never kept anything secret from me except this one. One time, Aryan secretly called me and told me about Maria, that she used to chat with someone the whole day long and sometimes video call also. She was my younger sister, but she was in her adulthood also, so I decided to clear the whole thing with her. One particular day after my office hours, I called her and asked about the guy. She told me about everything. His name was Jason, and he belonged to a rich family. I should have stopped her right there and inquired about that guy also, but that was the biggest mistake I made. I thought it was just for some time, and she was right. Then there was nothing wrong with that guy. I didn't put much thought into this matter and let it go. Everything was going well, but after a few months, she always seemed stressed out and depressed. She always sounded low and never told me anything about her problem, even after asking repeatedly. One day, I got a call from an unknown number. I received it, and it was Aryan. He was a little tense because it was already evening time, and Maria had returned back from her college. I tried to call her again and again, but her phone was switched off. I was tense about her. I called my parents and explained to them the whole situation. They closed the shop and ran back home. They inquired about each and every friend of hers, but no one knew about her. In fact, we got to know that Maria was not going to college for about 10 days. This was when I started to doubt. She always left home saying that she was going to college, but she never reached there then. Where in the hell was she going regularly? We were getting worried about her. My mother started to cry. We decided to go to the police and file a missing report, but before we went, I got an anonymous call on my number. It was some guy who said to me that he had kidnapped my sister and blackmailed me for ransom. He also asked me not to dare to go to the police or he would kill my sister right that instant. We all were scared, so we didn't go to the police. My father ran to the bank to arrange the money, and I also did the same. I had some savings which I had kept in case of an emergency. We took all the money she demanded and left it in the place he asked us to. My father and I were standing a little away from that spot and were waiting for the money. The kidnapper called me and asked me to return home. I asked about my sister, and he said that she will arrive tomorrow morning safe and sound. We had no option but to believe him, so we did. But she didn't return the next morning. I kept on calling on that anonymous number, but the number was out of reach. We understood that we had been cheated. We both ran to the police station and explained the whole situation. They asked me to give them the kidnapper's number. They traced the number and found the last location in just a few minutes. They asked us to accompany them. After about half an hour of driving, we reached the spot where his phone was traced. It was an old warehouse in a totally deserted area, a little far from the town area. The cops asked us to stay in the van and sneaked inside with guns in their hands. I was getting impatient and didn't know why, but I had a strong feeling that something was not right. After a few minutes, one of the officers returned back to us. He asked us to come with them inside. I asked him if they found Maria, but he told me to come with him and see for myself. My dad and I went inside the warehouse. We saw that the cops were standing there. After we reached them, they spaced out, and what I saw almost took my soul out of my body. It was my sister, and she was in pieces. There was blood all around her, and her body parts were cut into several pieces. My dad saw all this and passed out. Suddenly, the cops heard some noise and went on alert. They pulled me and my dad into a corner and left Maria as she was. There were two guys who entered the warehouse from the back door. They didn't have any idea that the cops had already reached there. They came there with a bag in their hand and started packing Maria's body parts into it. I was there all along, watching all this, but I couldn't see this brittleness for long. I pushed the cops and ran to them screaming loudly. I jumped on both of them and started beating them. The cops came and caught them red-handed and took me away from them. I was filled with rage, and I wanted to kill those bastards who did this to my sister. The cops somehow managed to calm me down and took us all back to the police station. They put those kidnappers behind the bars and started beating them until they accepted their sins. He was none other than the guy whom Maria fell in love. They accepted everything and told us about everything they planned.
They told us that it was Maria who planned her kidnapping to get money from her own family so that she can marry Jason and they could leave this country. But she had no idea that it was Jason's plan all along to force her to plan her own kidnapping. And once he got the money, he killed her and was about to flee this country without getting noticed. After more investigation, he admitted the whole planning of his crime, along with other extortions, like making money from her clients when he was an escort. They got the punishment for their crimes. But in this whole mess, the worst thing was that Maria lost her life to a guy who only played with her for money.
I worked at Target in around 2010. It was a cool job. All I had to do was sit around, do the paperwork, and other things people do. I was the manager at the Target, and I got hooked up as a manager because my cousin had a good relation with the store owner. I was around 25 when I got the job, and I had no experience prior, so getting that job was a privilege, and I very well knew it. So I was one of those managers who worked too much, even though there was less physical work to do, but I was knee-deep in all the paperwork. The thing with Target is that it is a big store, and the thing with big stores is that it comes with a large number of annoying people. Target is a big store, and a day don't go by that there's not some lady or middle-aged man flipping out over the products. It was one headache that we constantly had to go through, and even though we were not allowed to really be aggressive to customers, there are times when you want to do things to them that you cannot really do. But there isn't much you can do than just sit and listen and solve whatever issue they're having. It is tough, but it is something that we have to do in order to make it better. One day, things were very hectic at the store, and it was then that things got out of hand with one of the customers. Things were as usual as they always were, and the store was busy. The chaos was being managed just fine, and when we thought things cannot be weirder, they did, spiraling into a chaotic shitfest when suddenly an angry customer wanted a refund. And we told him about the refund policy, but he just won't admit that he was at the wrong one here, and we had no choice but to call in security. He wanted to talk to me, and I told him there was no way that we could do anything about the thing, and he was quite aggressive about it and demanded to see me. I got out, and then he told me, "You better give me my refund or it's going to be really bad for you. I will make sure you shit bricks for the rest of your lives." I looked at him and I said, "Sir, our refund policy is a bit different, and the product you brought in has been used like multiple times. We cannot really refund you your money, but if you want us to replace your product, we can happily do that." And the man looked furious and said, "I want my money, dumb bitch." And I told him that it cannot possibly be done. He told me that he will come back for me and teach me a lesson. Now, it wasn't the first time that I was being told that my life is in danger, but then it wasn't the first time that someone said that they will kill me. But this time, the man was bigger than anyone I have seen, and his eyes were red as the sky during sunset. He was accompanied out of the store by the police. I wasn't really scared by the man. More like this time it felt like it was more real than before. And this time, it felt like the warnings were somehow real. As the police accompanied him away from the store, I could see his red eyes filled with anger and hate looking right at me as if he wants to kill me. I called in the inspector the evening asking whether the man was released from the prison, and the policeman said, "We had nothing against him. He did not really commit a crime, he was just being an asshole. We don't really put people in jail if they are assholes." I said, "He wanted to kill me. I think you should have kept him in the prison." The policeman replied with a chuckle. He was probably coked out of his mind. He probably doesn't remember you, and secondly, if he does, don't worry, we will arrest him before he kills you. Now, the way he talked all sarcastic and wise-ass, I didn't think that the police will be much help when the guy comes in and tries to kill me in the store. I was slowly getting paranoid by all of it. There was something about the rage in this guy, and I could see. I was having flashbacks of his eyes with volcanic anger. I was scared for my life. Moreover, I was scared, what if he finds out where I live? It will be so much easier for him to just come in and strangle me while I was vulnerable. I wasn't sure about this guy, and he was easily in my head this time completely. I made sure that I am not being followed. The first thing I did was buy a taser. I did not want to be defenseless if he approaches me. I wasn't the one to be fooled around with. I was thinking of buying a gun before, but that would be too irrational of a response. Now that I think of it, every response that I had was irresponsible. I remember having nightmare about the guy confronting me in the parking and killing me. It's like never before. It was the Monday morning, and all my weekend had been spent thinking about what if the man confronts me? What will I do, and how will I defend myself? So I was a bit cranky and anxious the Monday morning into work. I stepped out of my car where it was parked and went about my day.
The day went calm and easy, and there was no angry man spotted, and surprisingly, the Monday went by easy. There was no confrontation this Monday, and things went smooth, so I was a bit relaxed, and there was no sign of that big man anywhere. And then, as I was moving to the parking lot as the day was ending, and I was getting back after closing in the shop and getting done with all the accounts and paperwork, I saw the light flickering the parking, and it was just me and the other car in the parking lot. I did not know who it was. I looked at it, and I was a bit nervous, and there was this eerie feeling that I had that something wrong is about to happen. And then I slowly approached my bag and took the taser in my hand. I had that feeling that somebody was standing over me. I looked back, and I saw the same old man standing tall right behind me, and before he can do or say anything, I reacted with the fight or flight reaction. But instead of running, I stood my ground and I tased him. And as I tased him, he fell. And as he was getting down, I could see the flowers dropping out of his hands, and I was realizing that I had acted too fast. I saw the man picking up, trying to get back to his senses, and then looked at me and said, "Well, fair enough. I guess we are even. I'm sorry for my behavior earlier. I apologize." And then handed me the flower, and told me to give it to the staff. And I asked him if he's alright, and apologized for tasing him. Well, good thing I am not worried about him killing me anymore, for he knows that the tables can turn on him too.
In that moment on the verge of death, it's true what they say. Your life flashes before your eyes. It's like rewatching a TV series, but you're the star. As poor as a church mouse, I never had much ambition. I was content with part-time jobs that paid just enough for me to scrape by. But then I got married. I still don't know how I managed to save enough money for the big day. I thought that would be it, that life would return to normal. Now I see how wrong I was. A week into my marriage, I finally understood why all my married friends were so fixated on earning more. With a new wife and no savings, I was filled with shame. I never thought I would regret getting married just a few days in. But there I was, questioning why I had said yes. My friend helped me get a job at Target, but the only shift available started at 5 in the morning. I'm not a morning person. I prefer to sleep until noon, but that wasn't an option anymore. The pay wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible either. I had no complaints until I realized the true necessity for more income. After 3 months of marriage, I felt exhausted, as if I'd been married for 30 years. I kept wondering why I had agreed to the wedding. I admit I regretted not working harder and saving money earlier. My wife Charlotte never said anything about our financial situation, and that made me feel even worse. I tried to show her more physical affection, but for someone as dirt poor as me, it felt like a mistake. 2 months later, I came home to a surprise. Charlotte was pregnant. She was so happy, so I pretended to be happy too. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I just kept thinking about how many more jobs I would need. My worry grew with each passing day. I was ready to do anything to provide for my family, but with no proper education, there was only so much I could do. The money from my current job helped, but I knew the expenses would multiply 5 times after the baby was born. One night, I didn't want to go home. The urge to run away from everything was overwhelming. I decided to go to a bar to have a drink to calm my nerves. I stared at the glass of beer, thinking about the cost. Then I heard someone call my name. I turned my head and saw a muscular man smiling at me. I immediately wondered if he was gay, but that wasn't the case. He asked me if I had money problems, and I wondered if he was psychic. He wasn't. He showed me a tiny pouch and said, "These babies can earn you some real good money." The man was a drug dealer. I didn't want to get involved, but when he explained how much he earned just by handing out a few pouches a week, I couldn't find a reason to say no. He gave me a burner phone and a few packets for the first week, telling me I would get calls on the phone for deliveries. At first I was terrified, still unsure. But a month passed and I was earning enough to buy everything our baby would need. I was even able to fill the refrigerator with food for Charlotte's pregnancy craving. One day, Charlotte asked me where all the money was coming from. She was suspicious after I brought home an expensive crib for our baby. I lied and told her my pay at Target had increased, and I had a new, well-paying part-time job. I'm not sure if she believed me, but she never asked again. I kept lying to avoid suspicion. and despite my desire to quit my job, I continued to work there. That day, I got a call early in the morning for a delivery at 6. My shift started at 5, so I put the packet in my pocket and went to work. I was anxious, and my coworkers noticed, but I ignored their questions. 5 minutes early, I got another call. After asking for a bathroom break, I hurried out. When I got to the man, I couldn't find the packet. I remembered I'd put it in the same pocket as my cell phone and might have dropped it. I asked the man to wait and ran back. When I got there, I saw the packet in the hands of my manager. A coworker named Sam had picked it up and told the manager. I couldn't get it back and was fired on the spot. I didn't want to get the police involved, so I quietly left, but I was furious. I kept cursing Sam for not minding his own business and just returning the packet to me. The burner phone in my pocket started ringing incessantly, annoying me. I didn't answer. I planned to go home and get another packet from my hiding place. While crossing the street, still cursing my coworkers, my phone rang again. I was so caught up in my thoughts that I didn't see the car coming towards me. Without warning, I felt a sudden jolt of energy as I was thrown into the air. In those slow motion moments in the air, I saw the white car, and then I hit the ground. I heard my bones cracking, followed by a wave of pain. Everything started to get fuzzy, and I could feel warm blood gushing from my body. It took me a few moments to realize I was possibly dying. I don't know if the car stopped, or if the driver came to my side. All I know is that darkness was spreading, and as I lost consciousness, every moment of my life flashed before me. My past failures, my pregnant wife, my unborn child. Who would protect them now? It was my fault from the very beginning. I should never have taken the easy way out. I should have worked harder from the start. It's a lesson I've learned and one I will try to improve upon, if I'm still alive after this.
Born in London, England, 14-year-old Hannah Williams was living her life normally. Her parents got separated when she wasn't even born. After giving birth, her mother raised her alone as a single parent. Hannah was fond of fashion, and she loved to go shopping in Deptford area, where she often went for shopping, so the market traders knew her very well. And on the 21st of April 2001, she went window shopping in Deptford after telling her mom, but little did she know that this could be her last trip. Minutes after leaving home, Hannah received a phone call, but after that, she disappeared. She was also supposed to meet a friend in the evening, but she never showed up. Hannah's mother, Bernadette, called her cell phone multiple times, but she did not answer. She waited several hours for Hannah to return home, but she didn't. When Hannah did not return, her mother reported it to the police, and the search for Hannah began. Confusion rose when one of her friends reported seeing her, so it was presumed that she had run away from home, and search stopped. After a year later, on the 15th of March 2002, when Hannah's mother was watching TV, she saw on the news that a girl's remains had been found. She instantly recognized the clothes to be Hannah's, which she had been wearing before her disappearance. The police were conducting the search for another missing victim, 15-year-old Danielle Jones, who had disappeared on the 18th of June 2001, when she was on her way to school in East Tilbury, Essex. They found a girl's body at cement works in an industrial area of Northfleet, Kent. Apparently, a workman was using a digger in order to clear the dense undergrowth when he saw a dead body. He immediately informed police after it. It was assumed that the found remains are of Danielle, but her mother recognized her on TV and immediately rushed to the scene. The day Hannah disappeared, she was wearing black sleeveless top under a denim jacket. There was a pattern of gold leaves on her top, burgundy trousers, a gold chain, and 2 gold ear studs. The final DNA reports, even after post-mortem being inconclusive, confirmed that the found body is Hannah's. Media was silent for a few days, but then again, they started reporting that it is possible that the found body could be of Danielle Jones, the 15-year-old middle school girl who was gone missing a year ago. During the investigation, police found that right after she went to the shopping trip, Hannah received a phone call by the phone of a woman named Mary Scollin. The woman had an affair with Hannah's father and had been her friend after that. She was living with a man named Robert Howard back in 1999. That was when she introduced him to Hannah. He had previously been involved in multiple sex crimes and had a record about it, and Scollin had no idea about that. 8 days after the discovery of Hannah's dead body, police arrested Robert Howard on the 23rd of March 2002. According to a site, Mirror Online, police believe that Howard lured Hannah using 13-second call by Mary Scollin's device. Howard abducted her and raped her. When Hannah fought back in attempts to free herself from him, he strangled her by a blue rope. After killing Hannah, Howard wrapped her body in a tarpaulin and threw her in a tunnel in the abandoned Circle Cement Works in North Fleet. The blue rope was still tied around her neck when the body was found. Miss Scollin did not know about the crime history of her new boyfriend Howard, and when Hannah went to see her at her home on Montagham, South London, Hannah encountered Howard and was introduced by Miss Scollin. After Hannah Williams' body was discovered and Robert was arrested on the 23rd of March 2022, the trials began, and during the trial, his sex criminal history was revealed. He had been a sex offender of several cases throughout his life. Robert Howard was born on the 20th of April 1944 in a village named Wolfhill in County Loyes, Republic of Ireland. His first conviction was at the age of 13 for burglary. He attempted to rape a 6-year-old girl in London at the age of 19. After that, he was sent to prison for burglary and attempted rape in Cork. Robert was also suspected in several disappearance cases of women and girls. Jojo Dolan of Callan and Annie McCart of New York Tourist was also one of the cases he was suspect of. McCarrick was disappeared in 1993. It was the same year when Howard was convicted of unlawful carnal knowledge of a girl under 17 in the rape case of a 16-year-old girl in Castlederg, County Tyrone in Northern Ireland. Robert was on bail on the 14th of August 1994, and the 15-year-old Arlene Arkinson went missing in Bondurant County, Donegal. Her body was never found, and she was presumed dead. It was reported that Arlene was last seen with Robert in a car. He was arrested 6 weeks after the disappearance of Arlene. Robert Howard was found guilty at his trial at Maidstone Crown Court in October of 2003 for the rape and murder of Hannah Williams. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with no minimum term. He was again held for trial in 2005 on charges of murdering Arlene Atkinson. An inquest was begun into Arlene's death in February 2016, which included the testimony of his earlier offenses. The testimony claimed him to be extremely dangerous to Arlene at the time of her disappearance. Another inquest found him guilty of Arlene's murder in 2021 and was ruled that he should have been arrested immediately. Howard spent the rest of his life in prison and was found dead at the age of 71 on the 2nd of October 2015. Hannah's case was discussed by criminologist Professor Fiona Brookman in a 2005 book titled Understanding Homicide. She said, Hannah's disappearance never attracted the kind of headlines that followed the disappearance of Danielle Jones, a 15-year-old schoolgirl who went missing 2 months after Hannah's disappearance, nor the widespread media coverage of the disappearance of the Millie Dowler at 13 years old. Despite the best efforts of the National Missing Persons Helpline to generate significant media coverage of all vulnerable missing persons, the media only tends to focus on particular cases that fit in with their publications. The vulnerable cases which generate the great publicity tend to be those where the missing person is white, female, from a middle-class, 2-parent stable family, and there's no indication that the young person may have run away. Hannah did not fit all these criteria. She was not the model middle-class schoolgirl. Rather, she was from a working-class background. Her parents were estranged, and she wore a stud in her nose.
As I was driving Ella to her competition, focused on not being late, she nudged me and pointed to the side of the road. A man who seemed to be under some influence was getting arrested. There are many cases like this you witness daily while driving where people get arrested for breaking the rule. But looking at the arrest, I was reminded of an incident that happened in the past. It was a lovely Saturday morning, and I was driving to work down the interstate. When I woke up that morning, I received news that my manager, who makes our work life harder than it should be, would be absent. So, I was in a pretty good mood. I had no idea at the time what else my morning had for me. The road was relatively quiet, and since I had left my house early, I was in no hurry. My favorite song played on the radio, and I sang along, tapping my fingers on the steering wheel. As I drove in the middle lane, I glanced in the rearview mirror and noticed a black car approaching at a high speed. The driver was breaking the speed limit, and I watched as he quickly passed me. However, something alarming caught my attention. A woman was banging on the window of the car and screaming at the top of her lungs. Even though I only saw her briefly, I was sure of what I saw. Her hair was tangled and disheveled, and her clothes were crumpled and messy. I couldn't quite make out what was happening in the hazy distance. However, as someone with 5 loving sisters, seeing a woman in distress was enough to spur me into action. A sudden wave of determination washed over me, and without a second thought, I stepped on the gas and surged towards the black car. I started following it, not entirely sure of what was happening inside. The woman in the car seemed to have noticed me following them and began to scream. I could see from her lips that she was frantically asking for help. In a state of panic, I took out my phone and pressed 911 on the dialing pad. I brought the phone closer to my ears while trying to match the car's speed to avoid losing it. After a second ring, a female dispatcher answered the call. 911, what's your emergency? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady, and said, "Hello, ma'am. I'm following a black sedan, and there's a woman inside screaming. She's probably being held against her will." I quickly told the dispatcher the highway I was on, and as I did, I noticed the car slowing down. The driver had probably realized he was being followed. I also slowed down, keeping a safe distance behind them, my heart pounding with fear. I noticed the man turning back, stretching his hand to grab something. For a second I thought he had a gun or something, so I tried to stay out of his sight. But he took a belt and started hitting the woman while saying something I couldn't understand. My eyes widened, and I told the dispatcher about what I was seeing. The dispatcher reassured me that she had alerted the cops in the area. The man suddenly stopped the car, and I also had to push the brakes. Then, all of a sudden, he opened his door and stepped outside. My eyes followed the gun in his hand as he drew nearer. But before he could do anything, I noticed a police car approaching, and he ran back into his vehicle. The police started chasing him, and even though I didn't have to follow them anymore, I couldn't help being worried about the woman. He couldn't get far, and was pulled over. I exited my car and stood there, watching as the cops handcuffed him on the ground before escorting him inside their vehicle. My eyes trailed the man's car, where the woman was still sitting while sniffling. One of the cops approached her and asked if she was okay before they asked what was going on and if she knew the man. The woman started wailing as she began to tell everything, but no one could make out her words, so the cops offered her water and tried to calm her down before questioning. After about half an hour, she finally stopped crying and started telling them what happened. That morning, when she was getting ready for work, someone knocked on her door. She went there to open it, and when she saw it was her ex, she told him to go away since she didn't want anything to do with him. But he pushed his way inside and grabbed her by the hair before he started beating the shit out of her. Eventually, he knocked her out, and when she was unconscious, he loaded her inside his car and started driving to God knows where. When she finally regained her senses, she started banging on the window and asking him to let her go, but he kept hitting her and telling her to shut up if she didn't want to die. He told her he didn't want to let her go, but since she was stubborn about getting away from him, he had no choice but to do this to her. That was when I noticed her screaming. The woman said he abused her even during the relationship, so she broke up with him. I was asked to give a statement that day, and since I had the recordings of the phone conversation with the operator, I gave them to the detectives a week later. I hope to know the case's progress, but haven't heard anything since. They told me they would be in touch, but it's been 2 years since that incident, and I have no idea if he got punished for what he did or not. I'm glad I followed them that day, because that creep would have done something unspeakable to her if I didn't. Even the thought of something like that makes me shudder with horror. Ella, can you promise me something? I asked her as she was about to exit the car. What? She asked hurriedly. Tell me whenever you meet a guy and think about dating him. She rolled her eyes at my words. You've told me this 1 billion times, Alex. Don't worry. I won't fall for a bad guy. After saying this, she walked out of the car. There are all kinds of psycho people in the world. I feel horrible for those who meet them and end up suffering because of them. That was why I'm cautiously overprotective about my sisters. For I never